On October 31st, 1952, inside a Bowery warehouse in New York, Lucky Luciano set a trap meant to erase Bumpy Johnson from Harlem. 12 armed men entered the room. Only one man was supposed to leave. This was not rage or ego, but a cold calculation of power. One man stood unarmed against an empire. So what did Bumpy Johnson do that forced the Mafia to step back for 15 years? To understand that moment, the story must return to where the trap was first set. The warehouse on Bowery Street had no windows and one exit. At 2:47 in the morning on October 31st, 1952, 12 men with guns formed a kill circle around Bumpy Johnson. The concrete floor still held bloodstains from the last man who died here. That was 3 weeks ago. The body left through the loading dock in pieces wrapped in canvas. Lucky Luciano stepped into the light with his .45 automatic pointed at Bumpy's heart. The muzzle tracked his sternum without wavering. 7 feet of killing distance, close enough to see the impact. Far enough to avoid the spray. Luciano's finger curled around the trigger with the kind of pressure that sits one breath away from a corpse. Bumpy stood with empty hands. No weapon. No knife. No backup hidden in the rafters with a rifle. Just skin and bone inside the teeth of a trap designed to chew him into meat. Behind him, 12 barrels formed a firing squad. Thompson submachine guns. Sawed-off shotguns. One man held a meat cleaver still stained brown from previous work. The countdown started when the door locked 2 minutes ago. In 90 seconds, Luciano would decide. Pull the trigger and Bumpy's ribcage explodes inward. His lungs collapse. His heart stops pumping. He drops like a sack of wet cement and Harlem changes ownership before sunrise. That was the plan. Clean. Simple. Permanent. But Bumpy's eyes stayed locked on Luciano's face. Not the gun. Not the exit. Not the 12 men who would turn him into a red smear on concrete if Luciano gave the signal. Just direct eye contact that said something Luciano could not decode. This is where the story turns. This is where you need to understand what brought both men into this room. Because the trap was not set that night. The trap was set 7 days earlier when Luciano signed Bumpy's death warrant. Bumpy Johnson owned Harlem the way a king owns a country. The numbers rackets alone pulled $60,000 weekly. Every speakeasy, every card game, every backroom operation between 110th and 155th paid tribute. Not to the Italians, not to the Commission, to Bumpy. Only Bumpy. The 5 families watched this arrangement like wolves watching a wounded deer. Harlem represented territory they wanted, money they needed, control they demanded. But Bumpy refused every offer, every partnership, every suggestion that maybe he should consider working under Italian protection. 3 weeks before the warehouse, Genovese soldiers tried pushing into Harlem corners. Bumpy sent them back in ambulances. One lost 6 teeth and his left kneecap. Another needed reconstructive surgery after his nose got hammered flat with a brick. The third still cannot close his right hand because someone methodically broke each finger with a ball-peen hammer. This was not negotiation. This was war declared without words. Frank Costello called Luciano that same night. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Costello wanted Bumpy erased. The Commission wanted Harlem absorbed. Luciano had 48 hours to solve the problem, or someone else would solve it for him. Luciano understood what that meant. Either he controlled the situation or he became the situation. Either Bumpy died or Luciano's authority died. There was no middle ground. No compromise. No third option that let both men walk away breathing. So Luciano sent Costello with an offer. Partnership. Protection. Percentages that would make Bumpy legitimate. Bumpy refused without letting Costello finish the pitch. Luciano sent Meyer Lansky with numbers, real money, guaranteed income, safety from other families. Bumpy said no before Lansky opened his briefcase. Luciano sent Albert Anastasia with the final warning. Accept the deal or prepare for open war. Not a skirmish. Not a street fight. A full extermination campaign where Harlem burns block by block until nothing remains but ashes and bodies. Bumpy chose war. That decision forced Luciano's hand. You cannot let defiance stand. You cannot let one man prove the system can be ignored. Because if Bumpy survives this, every soldier and every family will ask the same question. Why do we follow orders? Why do we pay tribute? Why do we accept commission authority when Bumpy Johnson does not? The entire structure collapses. The peace Luciano built after killing Joe Masseria shatters. New York goes back to the blood-soaked chaos of the 20s. Bodies in barrels. Bombs in restaurants. Kids with guns settling adult business because trust disappears and violence becomes the only language anyone speaks. Luciano remembered those years. He remembered finding his cousin in a car trunk with his throat cut ear to ear. He remembered the restaurant where someone wired dynamite under the kitchen and killed 17 people, including 2 children. He remembered the feeling of constant paranoia where every handshake might end with a knife between the ribs. He built the commission to end that nightmare. 5 families, clear boundaries, disputes settled through arbitration instead of assassination. Rules that everyone followed because the alternative was mutual destruction. Bumpy Johnson took those rules and used them as toilet paper, so the warehouse became inevitable. Bumpy would disappear into the foundation. The body would never surface. Harlem would wake up leaderless and confused. Genovese soldiers would step into the vacuum before anyone organized resistance. Problem solved. Authority restored. System maintained. Luciano raised the pistol higher. The front sight centered on Bumpy's sternum. The hammer pulled back with a metallic snap that echoed off concrete walls. His thumb rested on the safety. One click and the weapon goes hot. One trigger pull and Bumpy's chest cavity fills with lead. The distance between them held enough space for 12 witnesses to watch the execution. Close enough that missing was impossible. Far enough that blood would not spray back onto Luciano's suit. Bumpy did not move. Did not speak. Did not shift his weight or turn toward the door or show any sign of the fear that should flood a man's nervous system when death aims at his heart. This was wrong. Luciano felt it in his gut. Men facing execution react. They beg, or they charge, or they try bargaining for 5 more minutes of breathing. They do not stand calm while 12 guns track their vital organs. Unless they know something? Unless the trap is not what it appears. Unless the man without the weapon understands the situation better than the man holding it. Luciano's finger moved to the trigger. 5.5 pounds of pressure fires a Colt .45. He applied 4 pounds. Then 4.25. The trigger moved backward in its housing. The internal mechanisms aligned for discharge. Bumpy's breathing stayed level. His eyes never left Luciano's face. His hands hung loose at his sides like a man waiting for a bus instead of a bullet. 4.5 pounds of pressure. The trigger traveled further back. 1 more pound and the hammer drops. 1 more pound and the firing pin strikes. 1 more pound and Bumpy Johnson becomes a problem that solved itself. But Luciano's finger stopped moving, because in that frozen second he understood. The man standing in front of him was not afraid. The man standing in front of him had not come here to beg or negotiate or buy time. The man standing in front of him had walked into this warehouse knowing exactly what waited inside. And he came anyway. That meant Bumpy knew something Luciano did not. That meant the trap had layers Luciano had not considered. That meant pulling this trigger might start something worse than letting Bumpy walk out alive. 60 seconds remained. Luciano's finger held steady at 4.5 pounds of pressure, 1 pound away from irreversible, 1 pound away from solving the problem or creating a bigger one. Bumpy finally spoke. 6 words. Quiet. Precise. Delivered like a scalpel cutting into soft tissue. The words changed everything. 7 days before the warehouse, 3 Genovese soldiers walked into Harlem like they owned the block. They pushed into 145th Street at 9:30 on a Tuesday night. The corner belonged to a numbers runner named Samuel who paid his percentage to Bumpy every Friday without fail for 6 years. Samuel was 43 years old with a wife and 2 daughters. He ran clean operations and never shorted the count. The Genovese men did not care about Samuel's history or his family or his clean record. They cared about sending a message that Italian authority extended into Harlem whether Bumpy Johnson approved or not. The lead soldier was named Carmine Talese. He stood 6 feet 2 inches and had a reputation for breaking kneecaps with a tire iron when collections ran late. Talese walked straight to Samuel's table and swept the betting slips onto the sidewalk. The papers scattered across wet concrete. Samuel stood up slowly. He was smart enough to know what was happening and experienced enough to know arguing would make it worse. He started to speak, but Talese hit him across the mouth with the back of his hand. Samuel's lips split open. His front tooth cracked at the root. "You work for Genovese now," Talese said. 70% up. 30% you keep. Accept it, or I break both your legs and you explain to your wife why the rent does not get paid. Samuel wiped the red from his mouth with his sleeve. His hand shook, but his voice stayed level. "Mr. Talese, I work for Mr. Johnson. I have worked for Mr. Johnson for 6 years. I cannot change that arrangement without his permission." Talese grabbed Samuel by the throat and slammed him against the brick wall. Samuel's head bounced off the bricks, his vision blurred. Talese leaned in close enough that Samuel could smell garlic and wine on his breath. "Mr. Johnson does not run Harlem anymore," Talese said. "I run Harlem. My family runs Harlem. You pay us or you stop breathing. Simple choice." The other 2 soldiers moved to flank Samuel. One pulled a knife. The other cracked his knuckles. The conversation had reached the point where words stopped and pain started. Then Thomas arrived with 5 other men. Thomas was Bumpy's primary enforcer. He stood 5 feet 9 inches and weighed 170 pounds, but every ounce was functional violence. He specialized in persuasion through physical education. He did not announce himself or issue warnings. He walked up behind the first Genovese soldier and brought a ball-peen hammer down on the man's right hand where it rested on Samuel's shoulder. The bones shattered with sounds like dry wood snapping. The soldier screamed and dropped to his knees, clutching the ruined hand. Thomas kicked him in the ribs hard enough to crack 3 of them. The soldier collapsed sideways onto the pavement. The second soldier reached for his waistband, but Thomas was already moving. The hammer came around in a tight arc and connected with the soldier's jaw. The mandible fractured in 2 places. Teeth scattered across the pavement like dice thrown in a craps game. The soldier went down spitting bone fragments and choking on his own tongue. Talese released Samuel and pulled a switchblade. He lunged at Thomas with the blade aimed at his throat. Thomas sidestepped and caught Talese's wrist mid-thrust. He twisted until the elbow hyperextended with a wet popping sound. The knife clattered to the ground. Thomas kicked Talese's right knee from the side. The kneecap dislocated with a grinding crunch that made Samuel look away. Talese collapsed screaming. Thomas picked up the switchblade and closed it carefully. He put it in his pocket. Then he crouched down next to Talese, who was clutching his ruined knee and trying not to vomit from the pain radiating up his leg. "You listening?" Thomas asked. Talese nodded. Sweat poured down his face. His breathing came in short gasps. "Tell Vito Genovese that Harlem is closed," Thomas said. "Tell him we do not need Italian protection. Tell him we do not want Italian partnership. Tell him the next man who crosses 110th Street looking for tribute leaves in a coffin instead of an ambulance. You understand me?" Talese nodded again. Thomas stood up and looked at Samuel. "You all right?" Samuel touched his split lip gingerly. "Yes, sir." "Good. Clean this mess up. Get back to work." Thomas and his crew walked away. 20 minutes after it started, 3 Genovese soldiers left in ambulances. The message was delivered. Touch Harlem and leave in pieces. Frank Costello received the report at 11:15 that same night. He was eating dinner at Patsy's on West 56th Street when his driver brought the news. Costello set down his fork and stared at his veal piccata for 30 seconds without speaking. Then he stood up, walked to the restaurant telephone, and called. "Lucky Luciano." Luciano answered on the second ring. Yeah, we have a problem, Costello said. What kind of problem? The kind that puts 3 of our men in the hospital and makes us look weak in front of every crew from Brooklyn to the Bronx. Silence on the line. Then Luciano's voice came back cold and flat. Tell me. Costello explained what happened on 145th Street. He did not embellish or add interpretation. Just facts. 3 soldiers, 20 minutes, 3 ambulances, 1 message. When he finished, Luciano said nothing for 10 seconds. Then, Genovese want blood. Genovese wants Harlem burned to the foundation, Costello said. Anastasia agrees. Gambino agrees. The entire commission is unanimous. Bumpy crossed the line. Either you handle it or someone else will. Give me 24 hours. You have 12. The line went dead. Luciano set down the phone and poured 2 fingers of scotch. He stood at his apartment window overlooking Central Park and considered his options. Both led to disaster. Kill Bumpy and face chaos in Harlem for 6 months while every crew fought over the territory. Let Bumpy live and face rebellion from soldiers who would ask why they followed commission rules when Bumpy did not. He called the meeting for the following night. Private room at the back of a social club on Mulberry Street. 1 table, 6 chairs, no windows. Duke Ellington drifted through the walls from a radio in the kitchen. Mood indigo mixed with cigarette smoke. 5 men attended. Costello, Genovese, Anastasia, Gambino, Luciano. They represented every family that mattered in New York. Genovese spoke first. His voice carried the edge of a man who had already decided the outcome and was only attending to observe protocol. Bumpy put 3 of my soldiers in the hospital, Genovese said. 1 needs his jaw wired shut. Another lost 6 teeth and can barely eat solid food. Talese is getting a knee replacement and will walk with a limp for the rest of his life. This is not business. This is war. And war requires total response. What are you suggesting? Luciano asked. I am suggesting we burn Harlem block by block until nothing remains but ash and the memory of what happens when you defy the commission, Genovese said. I am suggesting we make an example so permanent that no one in Brooklyn or Queens or the Bronx ever thinks about independence again. Anastasia nodded. Vito is right. You let this stand and every ambitious lieutenant starts thinking he can build his own kingdom. The commission becomes a suggestion instead of law. We lose everything we built. Gambino leaned back in his chair. He lit a cigarette and let smoke drift toward the ceiling before speaking. What if we negotiate? Gambino said. Offer Bumpy a partnership. Let him keep running Harlem. He pays us tribute. We provide protection from other families. Everyone makes money. No war, no chaos, no police attention. Costello shook his head. We tried negotiation 3 times. I went personally. Meyer went. Even Albert went. Bumpy refused every offer without discussion. He does not want partnership. He wants complete independence. That is not something we can give. Then he needs to die, Genovese said. Simple as that. Luciano listened to the conversation circle around the same arguments for 90 minutes. Finally, he raised his hand for silence. We offer one final meeting, Luciano said. Face to face, neutral territory. We bring enough force to handle any situation. If Bumpy accepts reasonable terms, everyone walks out alive. If he refuses, he disappears and Harlem gets new management before sunrise. What makes you think he will come? Costello asked. He knows we want him gone. Walking into a room with us is suicide. He will come because he thinks he can win, Luciano said. He will come because refusing means we bring the war to him and he loses the advantage of choosing the battlefield. He will come because he is smart enough to know this is his last chance and arrogant enough to believe he can walk out alive. Genovese leaned forward. And when he refuses the terms, then we solve the problem permanently, Luciano said. 12 men, 1 exit, no witnesses. He vanishes, and Harlem accepts new management by morning. Anastasia smiled. I like it. When? 7 days, Luciano said. Location is the warehouse on Bowery. My people will handle the invitation. Bumpy gets one chance to bend. If he breaks instead, we bury him in the foundation. The meeting ended at 1:45. Each man left through different exits. The decision was made. 7 days until the warehouse. 7 days until Bumpy Johnson either accepted commission authority or stopped breathing. Luciano walked back to his apartment through empty streets. The scotch he poured earlier sat untouched on the table. He picked up the glass and stared at the amber liquid. Duke Ellington still played somewhere in his memory. He drank the scotch in one swallow. The countdown had begun. Either Bumpy would bend or he would break. Luciano suspected it would be neither. He suspected Bumpy had his own plan. But suspicion was not knowledge. Knowledge required waiting to see what happened when the trap closed and the guns came out and one man decided whether to pull the trigger or walk away. 7 days. The clock was running. Dorothy Washington cleaned floors at the Ravenite Social Club on Mulberry Street 5 nights a week. She was 62 years old with arthritis in both knees and hands that shook when she carried the mop bucket. The Italians barely looked at her when she entered through the back door at 11 each night. She was furniture, wallpaper, part of the building that happened to move and breathe. This invisibility made her the most valuable asset Bumpy Johnson owned. Dorothy arrived at the Ravenite on the night of the commission meeting at her usual time. She swept cigarette butts and wiped down tables while the meeting happened behind the closed door at the back of the building. The meeting ended at 1:45 in the morning. The 5 men left through different exits. Dorothy waited 15 minutes. Then she pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway toward the private room. Under the table, she found a crumpled piece of paper. The paper had an address written in pencil, Bowery Street, a warehouse number, a date 7 days out. Dorothy smoothed the paper flat and memorized the information. Then she put it back exactly where she found it. She finished cleaning at 2:30 and walked 6 blocks to a payphone. She dropped a nickel and dialed a number she had memorized 5 years ago. "Yeah," a man's voice said. "This is Dorothy. I need to speak with Mr. Johnson." 30 seconds passed. Then Bumpy's voice came through the line, clear and alert. "Talk to me, Dorothy." "They are planning something at a warehouse on Bowery Street. 7 days from now. I found the address under the table. They were all there. Costello, Genovese, Anastasia, Gambino, Luciano." "You sure about the date?" "October 31st. They wrote it down." "Good work. Go home. Forget this conversation happened." The line went dead. Dorothy walked home through empty streets. Her knees hurt, but she had done her job. The rest belonged to Bumpy. Bumpy sat in his apartment on Edgecombe Avenue and stared at the wall. The warehouse meeting was a trap. Luciano would bring guns and soldiers and one exit. The invitation would frame it as negotiation, but negotiation required both sides to have leverage. Walking into that warehouse meant walking into an execution. Unless Bumpy changed the equation before he arrived. He picked up the phone and dialed Illinois Gordon. Gordon answered on the first ring. "You know what time it is?" Gordon asked. "I need you to prepare the insurance package," Bumpy said. "Everything we discussed. Names, dates, bank accounts, payoffs, all of it. Put it somewhere safe. If I do not call you by noon on November 1st, you deliver that package to the FBI field office in Lower Manhattan." Gordon was quiet for 5 seconds. "You are walking into something bad." "I am walking into something that requires insurance. Can you handle it?" "I can handle it. But Bumpy, if you need this kind of backup, maybe you should not go at all." "Not going means they bring the war to Harlem and we fight on their terms. Going means I control the battlefield. Get the package ready." Bumpy hung up. Illinois Gordon was a lawyer who kept records that powerful men preferred to forget. He had documentation on every corrupt cop in Manhattan, every judge who took envelopes, every politician who looked away while the numbers rackets operated. The package Gordon would prepare was nuclear. If Bumpy died, Gordon would hand evidence to the FBI that would trigger indictments across 5 families. Kill Bumpy and watch your operation collapse under federal investigation. The insurance only worked if the other side knew it existed. That required making a phone call that would put Bumpy's life in even more danger. 3 days after Dorothy's report, Bumpy made the dangerous call. He dialed a number in Philadelphia that belonged to Angelo Bruno. Bruno ran the Philadelphia family and maintained careful neutrality in New York disputes. He was respected by all 5 families but controlled by none. Bruno answered on the 4th ring. "This is unexpected. I need you to deliver information to Lucky Luciano," Bumpy said. "Information that concerns his immediate future and his continued control of the commission." "I do not carry messages between men who are preparing to kill each other," Bruno said. "This message protects you as much as it protects me. Luciano is planning something that violates commission rules. If he follows through, Vito Genovese will use it to remove him from power. You want Genovese running the commission." Bruno was quiet. Bumpy could hear him breathing slowly while he considered the implications. "What rule is Luciano breaking?" Bruno asked. "He is planning to kill me without full commission approval. I operate independently in Harlem. Commission rules state that hits on independent operators require unanimous board approval to prevent territory wars. Luciano is moving forward with only partial support. Genovese knows this. He is waiting for Luciano to make the move so he can use it against him." "How do you know Genovese is aware?" "Because Genovese has people inside Luciano's operation the same way I have people inside the Ravenite. He knows about the warehouse. He knows about the date. He is letting Luciano walk into a rules violation so he can challenge his leadership." This was a lie. Bumpy had no proof that Genovese knew anything. But the lie was plausible enough that Luciano could not risk ignoring it. The commission operated on rules that kept the 5 families from destroying each other. Violating those rules gave rivals the ammunition they needed to remove you from power. Bruno exhaled slowly. "If I deliver this message and you are wrong, Luciano will hold me responsible. If I am wrong, I will be gone and you can tell Luciano I lied. If I am right, you will have saved him from losing his position. Either way, you come out ahead." "What exactly do you want me to tell him?" "Tell him Vito knows he broke protocol. Tell him Vito is waiting for him to finish the job so he can call a commission vote to remove him. Tell him the warehouse meeting is a trap, but not the trap Luciano thinks he set." Bruno was quiet for 10 seconds. "I will make the call. But Bumpy, if this backfires, do not expect Philadelphia to protect you." "Understood." The line went dead. Bumpy poured a glass of Barolo from a bottle he had been saving. He had just bet his life on Angelo Bruno's willingness to deliver a message and Lucky Luciano's fear of Vito Genovese. If Bruno refused to make the call, Bumpy would walk into the warehouse with no leverage. If Luciano dismissed the message as manipulation, the same outcome would follow. But if Luciano believed even a fraction of what Bumpy claimed, the dynamic would shift from execution to negotiation. Bumpy drank the wine slowly. It tasted like earth and tobacco and the bitterness that comes from grapes grown in soil that has seen too much violence. 4 days remained until the warehouse. 4 days to prepare for a meeting where 12 guns would point at his chest and one man would decide whether to pull the trigger. Bumpy had built his leverage. He had prepared his insurance. He had planted doubt in Luciano's mind. Now he needed to walk into that warehouse alone and unarmed and make Lucky Luciano believe that pulling the trigger would cost him everything he had spent 20 years building. The trap was set. The warehouse would determine whether it closed on Bumpy or on Luciano himself. Bumpy Johnson arrived at the Bowery warehouse at 2:37 in the morning on October 31st. He came alone. No crew waiting in cars down the block. No backup positioned on rooftops with rifles. No weapons tucked in his waistband or concealed in his coat. He walked through the front door empty-handed like a man attending a business meeting instead of his own execution. The door locked behind him with a heavy metallic click that echoed through the concrete space. 12 men formed a circle in the center of the warehouse. Thompson submachine guns, sawed-off shotguns, revolvers. One man held a tire iron. Another gripped ice picks. The smell of gun oil mixed with old wine and rust. Someone had been drinking Barolo. The bottle sat empty on a wooden crate near the wall. Lucky Luciano stepped forward from the shadows. His .45 automatic pointed at Bumpy's sternum. 7 feet of distance, the kind of range where you do not miss and the target does not have time to react. Luciano's finger rested on the trigger guard. His thumb held the hammer back. One motion and the hammer drops. One motion and the problem stops breathing. Bumpy stopped walking when he reached the center of the circle. He did not raise his hands, did not turn to check the exits, did not show any sign that standing surrounded by 12 weapons concerned him more than standing on a street corner waiting for a bus. His eyes locked on Luciano's face, not the gun, not the men flanking him, just direct eye contact that held steady without blinking. "You came," Luciano said. "You invited me," Bumpy replied. "I invited you to negotiate terms. You understand what that means. It means you offer me something I do not want and threaten me with something I am not afraid of. Then we see who leaves this building alive." Luciano's jaw tightened. His finger moved from the trigger guard to the trigger itself. The pressure required to fire a Colt .45 automatic is 5.5 pounds. He applied 4 pounds. The trigger moved backward slightly in its housing. "You are not afraid?" Luciano asked. "You walk into a room with 12 guns pointed at your chest and you feel no fear at all." "Fear is useful when it changes outcomes," Bumpy said. "Nothing I feel right now changes what happens next. So no, I am not afraid." "Then you are stupid or you are bluffing." "I am neither. I am simply aware of facts you have not considered." Luciano's finger held steady at 4 pounds of pressure. One more pound and the hammer drops. One more pound and Bumpy's ribcage explodes inward. One more pound and Harlem wakes up to new management. But something in Bumpy's voice made Luciano pause. The man spoke like someone holding cards that had not been played yet. "What facts?" Luciano asked. Bumpy smiled without warmth. "Angelo Bruno called you 3 days ago. He delivered a message on my behalf. A message concerning Vito Genovese and commission protocol. You received that message. You dismissed it as manipulation. But you are here holding that gun, and I am standing in front of you unarmed because somewhere in your mind you cannot completely dismiss what Angelo told you." Luciano's hand tightened on the pistol grip. "Bruno talks too much." "Bruno talks exactly enough," Bumpy said. "He told you that Vito knows you are moving against me without full commission approval. He told you that Vito is waiting for you to complete this execution so he can challenge your leadership at the next board meeting. He told you the truth, and you know it." "You are lying." "Then pull the trigger. Solve your problem. Bury me in the foundation and take Harlem by sunrise. But before you do, ask yourself one question. If I am lying, why would I walk into this room? Why would I come here alone and unarmed, knowing you plan to kill me? What possible advantage does that give me unless I know something that changes the equation?" Luciano's finger stayed at 4 pounds of pressure. The trigger held position. His thumb remained on the hammer. But he did not increase pressure. He did not pull. Because Bumpy was right. Walking into this trap made no sense unless the trap had layers that Luciano had not anticipated. "What do you know?" Luciano asked quietly. Bumpy took one step forward. The men around the circle raised their weapons higher. Fingers moved to triggers. Safeties clicked off. But Bumpy ignored them. He kept his eyes on Luciano and took another step. Now only 5 feet separated them. Close enough to see the sweat forming on Luciano's forehead. Close enough to smell the fear underneath the gun oil and tobacco. Bumpy leaned forward and spoke 6 words. He delivered them in a whisper that only Luciano could hear. 6 words that contained everything Luciano feared most. 6 words that turned the execution into negotiation. "Vito knows you broke commission rules." Luciano's hand trembled. The pistol barrel wavered slightly. His finger relaxed from 4 pounds of pressure to 3.5. His breathing accelerated. His pupils dilated. Every physical indicator showed a man whose certainty had just collapsed into doubt. "You cannot prove that," Luciano said. "I do not need to prove it," Bumpy replied in the same whisper. "I only need you to believe that Vito will use it against you, and you already believe it. You believed it the moment Angelo called. You believed it when you saw me walk through that door unarmed. You believe it right now, which is why your finger is not pulling that trigger." Luciano's jaw clenched. His hand shook harder. The gun barrel dropped 2 inches. Not much, but enough to shift the aim from Bumpy's heart to his stomach. Enough to show that the decision was no longer automatic. "If I let you walk out of here, what stops you from bringing war to my doorstep?" Luciano asked. "Self-interest stops me," Bumpy said. "War benefits neither of us. War draws police attention. War costs money and soldiers and territory. War ends with both of us weaker than we started. So instead of war, we negotiate terms that let both of us profit." "What terms?" "Harlem stays independent. I pay you 15% of gross revenue as tribute. In exchange, the commission recognizes Harlem autonomy and provides protection from other families who might test that boundary. You get money without territory. I get protection without surrendering control. Everyone profits. Everyone survives." Luciano stared at Bumpy for 10 full seconds without speaking. His finger stayed on the trigger, but the pressure did not increase. His hand still trembled, but the barrel stayed pointed at the floor instead of Bumpy's chest. The 12 men in the circle waited for orders. They waited for the signal to open fire. They waited for Luciano to decide whether negotiation was real or whether execution remained the objective. Finally, Luciano lowered the hammer on the .45. He did not holster the weapon, did not put it away. But he removed his finger from the trigger and held the pistol at his side. The gesture was small, but the meaning was absolute. The execution had become a negotiation. 15%, Luciano said. 15%, Bumpy confirmed. "You bring that payment personally every month. No intermediaries. No delays. You miss one payment and this conversation happens again except next time you do not walk out." "Understood." Luciano looked at the 12 men surrounding them. "Lower your weapons. We are done here." The men hesitated. They had come prepared for an execution and were now being told to stand down. But Luciano's order was absolute. One by one, the weapons lowered. Safeties clicked back on. Fingers relaxed from triggers. The kill circle dissolved into 12 men standing in a warehouse, wondering what had just happened. Bumpy turned and walked toward the exit. His back presented a target to 12 armed men who could still change the outcome if Luciano gave the word. But Luciano did not speak. He watched Bumpy reach the door. Watched him push it open. Watched him step into the night air and disappear into the darkness outside. The door closed. The warehouse returned to silence except for the sound of 12 men breathing and one man trying to understand whether he had just won a negotiation or lost control of the situation entirely. Luciano looked down at the .45 in his hand. His finger had been 1 pound of pressure away from ending Bumpy Johnson, 1 pound away from solving the problem permanently, but that 1 pound had felt heavier than the entire weapon. Because pulling that trigger meant risking everything he had built. Risking his position, risking his authority, risking a challenge from Genovese that could end with Luciano removed from power or removed from breathing. So he made the only choice that preserved his position. He let Bumpy walk. He accepted the 15%. He maintained control of the commission by avoiding the rules violation that would have given his enemies ammunition. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Lucky Luciano understood that the man who had just walked out of that warehouse had won more than a negotiation. He had won by making Luciano afraid of something worse than letting him live. The agreement took shape in silence. No handshakes, no signatures, no witnesses beyond the 12 men who had come prepared to commit murder and were now watching their boss negotiate terms with a man who should already be cooling on the concrete floor. 15% of Harlem's gross revenue would flow to the commission every month. Bumpy would deliver the payment personally to avoid intermediaries who might skim or delay or create excuses. The commission in return would recognize Harlem as autonomous territory. No Italian soldiers would cross 110th Street without Bumpy's explicit permission. No operations would launch in Harlem without consultation. No disputes would escalate to violence without arbitration. The arrangement benefited both sides in ways that war could not. Luciano collected tribute from territory he did not have to manage or defend. He avoided the police attention that would follow a prolonged campaign to conquer Harlem block by block. He maintained his position on the commission by avoiding the rules violation that Genovese could weaponize against him. Bumpy kept sovereignty over Harlem while gaining protection from families who might otherwise test his borders. The 15% was expensive, but it was insurance against war. War would cost more in soldiers and territory and time than any percentage ever could. The mathematics favored peace even if the principle favored resistance. Neither man won completely. Neither man lost entirely. This was the nature of real negotiation as opposed to the fantasy of total victory. You take what preserves your position and you accept what prevents your destruction. Everything else is ego, and ego gets men killed. Luciano spoke first after the long silence. You understand what happens if you miss a payment. I understand that you will interpret any delay as breach of contract and respond accordingly, Bumpy said. I also understand that responding accordingly means you face the same commission scrutiny you just avoided. So I will not miss payments and you will not need to make decisions that complicate your position. Luciano's jaw worked, but he did not argue the point. Bumpy had articulated the mutual dependency that made the agreement stable. Both men needed the other to honor terms because violation triggered consequences neither could afford. We are done here, Luciano said. Leave. Bumpy walked toward the exit without looking back. The 12 armed men watched him cross the warehouse floor. His footsteps echoed on concrete. The door opened. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of the city. The door closed. Bumpy Johnson vanished into the October darkness. Luciano stood alone in the center of the empty circle. His .45 hung at his side, unfired. The execution that 5 families had demanded had transformed into a business arrangement that no one outside this room would fully understand. He holstered the weapon and looked at his men. No one speaks about what happened here, Luciano said. Not to your wives, not to your crews, not to anyone. This conversation never occurred. Understood, 12 heads nodded. 12 men filed out through different exits. By sunrise, the warehouse stood empty, except for the smell of gun oil and old wine and the memory of a confrontation that should have ended in a body bag, but ended in a handshake that neither man actually offered. The story spread anyway because stories like this always spread. They leak through cracks in silence. They grow in the retelling. They become legend faster than truth. Luciano's version reached the other families within a week. He had offered Bumpy generous terms. Bumpy had accepted tribute arrangements that acknowledged commission authority over Harlem. The situation was resolved peacefully, which demonstrated Luciano's diplomatic skill and maintained commission unity. Harlem's version traveled different channels. Bumpy had walked into a trap designed to kill him. He walked out alive while 12 men with guns watched him leave. He paid no tribute that mattered because 15% was a rounding error compared to independence. He bent the commission to his terms instead of breaking under their pressure. Both versions were partially true. Both versions were deliberately incomplete. The full truth lived only in the minds of 13 men who understood that the warehouse meeting had not been won or lost, but carefully balanced between survival and surrender. The silence around certain details made the story more powerful than complete transparency ever could. What did Bumpy say to make Luciano lower his weapon? What leverage existed that turned execution into negotiation? What threat was powerful enough to make the commission accept terms instead of corpses? No one outside that warehouse knew for certain. The uncertainty created space for mythology, and mythology served both men better than documentation. Luciano maintained his authority by demonstrating he could negotiate peace without appearing weak. Bumpy maintained his reputation by proving he could face 12 guns and walk away breathing. The agreement held for 15 years. Bumpy delivered his percentage every month without fail. The commission never violated Harlem autonomy. The truce that began in a Bowery warehouse at 2:47 in the morning on October 31, 1952, remained intact until both architects were gone. History would remember it as the night Bumpy Johnson defied the mafia and survived. But the men who were there remembered something more complicated. They remembered the night two powers found equilibrium. They remembered the moment when violence became unnecessary because fear of greater consequences made negotiation rational. They remembered that real power does not come from pulling triggers. Real power comes from making your enemy afraid to pull theirs. Lucky Luciano collapsed from a heart attack at Naples Airport on January 26, 1962. He was 64 years old. The man who built the commission and defined organized crime for a generation died waiting for a film producer who never arrived. Bumpy Johnson suffered a fatal heart attack at Wells Restaurant in Harlem on July 7, 1968. He was 62 years old. He died holding a straight flush in a poker game he was winning. The agreement forged in the Bowery warehouse on October 31, 1952, remained intact for the entire span between those two deaths. 15% traveled from Harlem to the commission every month without interruption. No Italian soldiers crossed 110th Street without permission. No war erupted. No betrayal occurred. The peace held because both architects understood that alternatives were worse than compromise. Harlem never got absorbed into the Italian Empire. It remained sovereign territory operating under its own authority until Bumpy's death fractured the power structure that had maintained independence for nearly 2 decades. What the mafia could not take by force, time eventually claimed through biology. The truth about that warehouse confrontation died with the men who lived it. Bumpy Johnson never confirmed whether Vito Genovese actually knew about Luciano's commission rules violation. The entire threat might have been fabrication built on plausible fear. But fabrication only works when the target cannot verify the claim without triggering the consequence. Luciano could not check with Genovese without revealing his own vulnerability. So he accepted Bumpy's word because disbelief carried risks he could not afford. This is the architecture of psychological warfare. You do not need truth. You need belief. You do not need proof. You need doubt. You do not need superior force. You need superior understanding of what your opponent fears more than your weapon. Bumpy Johnson walked into that warehouse with nothing but information and nerve. He walked out with a treaty that preserved Harlem autonomy for 15 years. He achieved this not by matching Luciano's firepower, but by understanding that real power operates in the space between trigger and consequence. The lesson is simple and brutal. Violence is easy. Any fool with a gun can pull a trigger. But making your enemy afraid to pull theirs requires intelligence that most men do not possess, and discipline that most men cannot maintain. Real power does not come from squeezing the trigger. Real power comes from knowing when the trigger does not need to be squeezed at all. The warehouse teaches one truth that transcends criminal context. Real power comes from understanding what your opponent fears more than what you can physically control. Bumpy survived because he prepared intelligence while others prepared weapons. He created doubt where Luciano expected certainty. This applies to every negotiation you face in business-career relationships. Superior force means nothing if your opponent fears consequences you control. What leverage do you possess that you have not recognized? Write your answer below. This story examines historical strategy, not criminal behavior. Learn the psychology. Reject the context. Thank you for watching until the end. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next chapter of Bumpy Johnson's Impossible Survival.